All right, welcome back. We're going to do chapters 15 and 16 of The Catcher in the Rye today. You may recall we left Holden beaten up by a pimp in his pajamas in the past chapter, emasculated and in tears. He was able to get a couple of hours of sleep, about 10 a.m. now, Sunday morning, and he wakes up and he's hungry. It's been a long time since he's eaten anything. He doesn't take very good care of himself. He had previously a burger with Mal, Brossard, and Ackley. That was, even though just hours ago, it feels like a long time ago because it was in an early chapter of the book. Um, and he thinks about calling Jane, but he ends up calling Sally Hayes, who is Jane Gallagher's foil character. Sally's readily available for Holden, unlike Jane, who is out of reach. He kind of has Jane on a pedestal and he's too afraid to take her down and to meet with her again. So he has no problem calling Sally, who's a rich, privileged girl. The maid answers first, then her father, then she gets on the line. But she genuinely seems interested in Holden. She had earlier, it had been mentioned that she invited Holden over to trim the family Christmas tree the night before Christmas. That's a big deal. And then, when they're talking on the phone and going to make a date for later in the afternoon, she drops these guys who've been, pestering her. This Harvard guy who has been calling her night and day, and then this West Point cadet, right? Trying, I think, to make Holden jealous. So, regardless, they solidify a date to go to the theater, the Biltmore, at 2 p.m. later that day. Holden's going to go, even though he hates actors because they're phony, including the movies. And he's going to put his stuff in at Grand Central Station. He's checked out of that crazy hotel. He does not want to see Maurice again. And then he's got this time to kill. He thinks about his dad being a corporate lawyer and what a phony that would be, and how he invests in failing Broadway shows, which makes his mom so upset. But then in the midst of this like little anecdote memory, he slips in this truth bomb. My mom hasn't felt healthy since my brother Allie died. She's very nervous. That's another reason why I hated like hell for her to know I got the axe again. I think Holden's mom is unavailable to Holden right now because she's going through her own grief. And so instead of helping Holden deal with his, they just send him off to different schools. And it's not working. Clearly, Holden is spiraling. And in this morning, he has some breakfast, orange juice, bacon, eggs, toast, coffee, and it's a big meal for him. But again, he has this sort of guilt that comes along with that. So while he's eating, he sees these nuns come up with inexpensive suitcases. They're not even genuine leather. And he has a brief flashback to a time when he roomed with someone at Elkton Hills, a previous school he got kicked out of, Dick Schlegel, who also had cheap looking suitcases and seemed to borrow Holden's and put them on his side of the room as though they were his suitcases, right? And here come these nuns with these straw baskets, and one has a really pretty nice smile and glasses, and the other one doesn't talk very much. One teaches history, one teaches English. And they're just really kind to Holden. And in this interaction, Holden is Holden. Holden doesn't fake name. With Sonny in the previous scene, he was Jim Steele. And he's been Rudolph Schmidt to other characters. But here he's Holden Caulfield, student at Pensy. Not kicked out student, but student nonetheless. And these nuns have been moved from Chicago to New York to become teachers, and one of them is going to teach Romeo and Juliet, which Holden's like, wow, that's kind of a sexy play. So, as I've mentioned, these two things about coming of age, sex and religion, are on his mind with no adult guidance on how he's supposed to believe or what he's supposed to do or what's normal. And so in this conversation with these two older women where he feels very comfortable, that's just Holden's penchant is older women. He's got the mama issues, I suppose. And he even says that this one nun reminds him of Ernest Morrow's mom from the train. But it's just a cool juxtaposition to the scene that had happened before. So let me share my screen for a second. I like to compare his experience with Sonny to his experience with the nuns. I feel like it's a distinct and purposeful juxtaposition. So with his night with Sonny the previous night, it was obviously a Saturday night, and she's a prostitute. His interaction with the nuns, it was a Sunday morning, and it has church vibes, okay? Debauchery at night, church in the morning. He's struggling in both cases with the idea of sex, with the idea of religion. And with Sunny, $10 for both, in both cases, $10 is exchanged, or Holden pays out $10. He feels obligated to pay Sunny. Like he gave her the $5 and then he fought hard for that last $5 that he lost. But with the nuns, he just chooses to donate the $10. They've got their little wicker baskets, and it's just something he feels like he wants to do. So clearly, it's not the money that bothers him, it's the principle of the money. Um, with Sunny, she's Holden's age, but with the nuns, they're older. And of course, he's fake. He's pretends to be 22 years old, Jim Steele, but here he's authentic with the nuns. The green dress versus um, he notices that they eat just coffee. It's like the smaller meal, and he wants to pay for their meal, so he feels bad about that, but he also feels bad about the green dress. So it's this duality of guilt and sadness that he feels in both situations. And in both cases, he's viewed as younger. Like he lies to Sunny saying he's 22, and she's like fun you are. And then here they realize he's just this young boy. The high-pitched voice versus the purity of the nuns. And in both cases, he just wants to talk to them. And in both cases, he's drawn to their innocence. However, Sunny doesn't want to talk. Sunny's on the clock. Um, and after she leaves, that's when he starts praying out loud, perhaps to Allie. And so there's this merging of worlds here. And with the nuns, he feels a little awkward talking about Romeo and Juliet because it's kind of a sexy play in some parts. So the worlds collide. Sunny calls him Crumb Bum at the end, but the nuns call him a sweet boy. But both scenes end with embarrassment because, of course, Holden gets beaten up and flicked in his groin in with the Sunny Maurice conclusion. And then at the end of the nuns scene, he accidentally blows cigarette smoke, into one of the nuns' faces. I did something very stupid and embarrassing. I was smoking a cigarette when I went to say goodbye, and by mistake, I blew some smoke in their face. I didn't mean to. I apologized like a madman, but it was very embarrassing anyway. I just, poor Holden. He had had this really great experience, this interaction that seemed real, and then he screws it up. He acknowledges his own self-sabotage at times, and it's just it's so sad for him. But in chapter 16, he moves on. He continues thinking about the nuns and how, like, he's got the rich guilt that, someone like Sally Hayes' mom or even his aunt, like, if they were going to hold out a wicker basket for charity, that would only be temporary. They'd be wearing something fancy and then they would go somewhere swanky for lunch. And he feels bad because the nuns probably never get to go anywhere swanky for lunch. And it makes him sad. But then he slips into this record store and he buys, speaking of innocence, a Little Shirley Bean's album for his kid sister Phoebe. Now, also kind of a combination of maturity and innocence because it's a record for his sister, but it's like sung by this girl, Estelle Fletcher, who is Dixieland Whorehouse. um, and so two of the front teeth were missing in this one song, and she was ashamed of it. So it's again this blend. But she knew Phoebe would love it. Holden knows Phoebe would love it, and she goes skating on Sundays in the park, and so he's hoping he can bump into her because he just wants to go home. Anyway, he ends up bumping into another kid, a classmate of Phoebe's, and she's having trouble tying her skate. And he asks her, if he wants her help, if he can help her tie her skate. And she's very thankful. There's like a key it takes to tighten the skate. And so then he says, I asked her if she'd care for a hot chocolate or something, but she said no, thank you. She had to meet her friend. Imagine a 16-year-old boy inviting like a 10-year-old girl out for a hot chocolate. It's not quite appropriate. But again, Holden has been frozen at the age when Allie died, and Holden feels drawn to people who are innocent. And so anyway, he doesn't quite realize how inappropriate that that invitation was. But that's Holden for you. Like he's inviting cab drivers out for a drink. Why not ask this kid for a hot chocolate? He heads on. He's got time to kill. He's walking through Central Park. The Museum of Natural History is at the end of it. And he flashes back to field trips he used to have with Miss Tinker and their class, and just how wonderful that time was. How museums preserve things. It becomes a symbol in the novel. He says the best thing is in that museum, everything stayed the same, right where it was. Nobody would move. You could go there 100,000 times, and that Eskimo would still be finishing catching those two fish, and those birds would still be on their way south, and the deer would still be drinking out of that watering hole. Nobody would be different. The only thing that would be different is you. I think Holden is in this glass case, and he's unable to move forward with his life since his brother died. And while he's walking, he puts his hunting cap on and he feels that security. But when he gets to the museum, he cannot bring himself to go in. Perhaps he's changed too much. Or what if they have changed something inside that museum? He says certain things should stay the way they are. You got to be able to stick them in a big glass case and just leave them alone. That's not life. And that's what Holton struggles with, is this whole coming of age. That's the thesis statement of the book, that coming of age is difficult and you have to accept it. So we'll see how Holden's date goes with Sally in the next two chapters.